Hi all friends. How are you guys? See you again on the Ndrow Movie channel, which will discuss the storyline of the movie here. I don't forget to always pray for all of you to always be healthy and happy, and always in the protection of the Almighty God. And don't forget to remind those of you who haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. And don't forget to press the like button and the bell so you don't miss the video update from this channel. This time, I will discuss the storyline of the film entitled MOONFALL, which was released in 2022. No need to linger, let's just start the storyline. At the beginning of this video, we are shown three astronauts who are on duty in outer space. They are Brian Herper, Alan Marcus and Jacinda Fowler. While on duty, Brian suddenly saw an extraterrestrial or swarm that was speeding towards them. The creature also hit the bodies of Brian and Alan who were outside the plane. Luckily Brian managed to save himself and got into the plane. But unfortunately he failed to save Alan who was lost in outer space. After successfully getting into the plane, Brian immediately brought Joe back to Earth. Long story short, arriving on Earth, Brian tried to explain what really happened in outer space. But his confession about extraterrestrials actually made NASA think he was crazy. Joe, who was unconscious at the time of the incident, couldn't help Brian either. As a result, Brian's career as an astronaut was finally destroyed. Not only that, his wife also chose to divorce so that his wife named Brenda and their child named Sony chose to move to another area. 10 years later we are shown to a conspiracy theorist and astronomer named K.C. Houseman. At that time K.C. tried to sneak into the room of one of the astronomy lecturers at the University of California, with the aim of gathering information about orbital activity on the moon. While at work, K.C. gets an email containing information on unusual lunar activity. Armed with all that information, K.C. tried to contact NASA. But he never got an answer. On the other hand, we are shown Joe's current life. Currently he is still working at NASA, living with his son Jimmy and a nanny named Michelle. The next day, Joe received information that the moon's orbit had moved closer to Earth. In addition, they also saw a mysterious energy that suddenly came out of the crater of the moon. Because he never got a response from NASA, K.C. also collected all the data and took it to a museum to be given to Brian, who happened to be teaching there. But unfortunately Brian does not believe what K.C. said and only thinks of him as a conspiracy theorist. So Brian asked the guards to immediately kick K.C. out. Out of frustration, K.C. threw all the data he had collected. After finishing teaching, Brian got a call from his ex-wife who said that their son was arrested by the police because of a street racing case. Brenda herself is now married to another man named Tom and has two daughters, Nikki and Lauren. Therefore, Brenda asked Brian to come to court and free their son. At trial, Brian couldn't contain his emotions and kept interrupting the judge's words. This made the judge annoyed and decided to postpone the trial until next week, and that automatically made Sony have to be detained for another week. At the same time, information about the moon's exit from orbit and approaching the Earth is now starting to go viral everywhere. All the people panicked and started asking for clarification from NASA. Because they didn't want a commotion, NASA was forced to lie to the public and deny all the information currently circulating. But in fact it could not make people calm, so chaos ensued everywhere. People started evacuating themselves and looking for places to take shelter. Sooner or later people are starting to believe in the conspiracy theories spread by K.C. While NASA can no longer hide it, K.C. believes that the moon was created by aliens and there is a large room that is the control center. Knowing this, Brian went to find the data previously given by Casey in the trash can in the museum. Then he went to see Casey to ask his theory. At the same time, NASA sent several astronauts to check the condition of the moon in the crater of the moon. They also launched a tool to check the depth of the hole. But after entering as deep as 25 kilometers, the object suddenly rose again and was accompanied by a very large swarm. The swarm immediately attacked the astronauts and killed them all. On Earth, seawater slowly began to rise in tsunami. Casey and Brian, who were in the hotel hall, were also victims of the incoming seawater. After seeing what happened on the moon, Joe assumed that the creature was AI or artificial intelligence. It also made the NASA leaders afraid. So he chose to resign and go save his family before anything bad happened. And that means making Joe now get a position as leader of NASA. After that, Joe immediately asked the military for help to destroy AI on the moon. But the military even agreed to destroy the AI using a nuclear bomb. They do not think that his actions are actually very dangerous for mankind. Before the nuclear bomb was detonated, the military evacuated all residents to gather in a bunker that had been prepared. Joe then sends Michelle and Jimmy to take cover there too. After that, Joe contacted her ex-husband, General Davidson, to stop the military plan. Because Joe believes they can destroy AI without endangering many people. While at the hotel, Brian and Casey are picked up by several people to take to NASA. Arriving at NASA, Joe shows a video showing AI on the moon. And that's what causes the moon out of orbit. Therefore, Joe asks Brian for help so that he wants to return to NASA. After Brian agreed, then they began to prepare everything to start a journey into space and solve all the problems that exist on the moon. While preparing everything, Sony is released from prison and brought to meet Brian. There Brian can't linger, so he ordered Sony to go with the rest of the group to take cover in the bunker. Before embarking on the journey to the moon, a great shock finally occurred. Joe had a feeling they wouldn't leave Earth like that, so he asked everyone to save themselves first. When everyone had left, the two NASA employees who were still there saw Casey's calculation of the moon's orbit turned out to be very accurate. Upon hearing this, Joe got the idea to keep going to the moon with Brian and Casey. While Sony, Jimmy, and Michelle were asked to immediately go to the bunker and take shelter there. Long story short, at the time of their departure, the moon's gravity managed to make the spacecraft finally fly. But it also makes the seawater rise as if it will drown them. Lucky Brian managed to control the plane well as Sony, who managed to take Michelle and Jimmy away from there. Soon they arrived at the space station. There they stopped for a moment to do refueling. But they cannot linger any longer, because the appearance of the moon is getting closer to the Earth. With direction from Casey, they began to approach the moon. On Earth, Sony and the others were stopped by a mob who immediately stole their cars and bags. Because of that, in the middle of the snow they were forced to continue the journey on foot. To get help in the middle of the trip, they were surprised by a meteor shower from the shattered moon fragments. Therefore, Sony, Jimmy, and Michelle must fight to avoid the meteor shower as well as fight the gravity of the moon that attracts them. After walking quite a distance, Sony and the others finally arrived at Brenda's house. Because they could not stay there, they were forced to get out and go to the bunker. Of course, This time they had to prepare all the equipment, especially oxygen. Because the moon's atmosphere has begun to spread over the Earth. Back to the moon, Brian, Casey and Joe are now starting to enter the crater of the moon. They also launched a bomb to destroy the swarm. But the swarm approached their plane instead. Lucky Brian quickly realized that the swarm was interested in technology. So he quickly destroys objects that might attract the swarm.
Come on!
After that they were desperate to go into the crater as deep as approximately 25 kilometers. Of course, with the aircraft engine off so as not to provoke the swarm.
How deep do you think we are? They're like whales or...
Arriving inside, they realized that all the conspiracy theories that Casey created were true. Where the moon is a megastructure. After that they relaunched bombs to detonate swarm. But suddenly their plane this time moved on its own and lost control. They were brought into a room at a very high speed. So that both Brian, Casey and Joe are both unconscious. Not long after that Joe and Casey woke up. But strangely they did not find Brian. When they got out of the plane, they were very surprised, because the gravity there is the same as on Earth. Meanwhile on Earth the robbers who previously appeared, are now chasing Sony and the others. They tried to get through the storm in order to escape the robbers. After escaping from the robbers, they also get a call from General Davidson asking where Jimmy is at that time. Sony said that Jimmy was safe with him. But Joe and Brian are still on the moon. This took General Davidson by surprise. Because the military will soon launch a nuclear that will destroy the AI on the moon. When he wakes up Brian suddenly is in the white room with Sony who is still a child. Sony says that he is a system created in Brian's mind as someone who is most valuable to Brian at this time. Then he said that in ancient times it was their ancestors who created AI on the moon to help their lives. Until one day the AI that they created themselves suddenly lost control and started creating nanotechnology creatures to kill all biological creatures. After that their ancestors fled to the corner of the galaxy and began to create a mega structure called by the name of the moon. That's why AI currently wants to destroy the moon so that human civilization is completely lost. After listening to that explanation Brian finally realized. He tells Joe and Casey everything and rushes to do something to save the moon. As a result they went out and lure Swarm to be destroyed. At the same time Tom, who was walking with his son, was willing to give oxygen cylinders so that his son could survive. At that moment a meteor shower fell and began to attack them all. Because of such circumstances, the military prepared to fire nuclear weapons to save everyone. But in fact General Davidson chose not to do that, because he did not want to kill Joe who was still on the moon. Instead, he insists that he really believes in Joe and believes that Joe will succeed in saving them all. Meanwhile in outer space Brian conveys an idea where he will sacrifice himself to destroy the swarm. But the plan turns out to be a failure, as Casey replaces himself to sacrifice himself. Casey feels that Brian deserves to live and continue his work as an astronaut. While he chooses to sacrifice and entrust his mother to Brian, Until finally Brian managed to carry out the task and destroy the swarm by using a bomb. It also causes the moon fragments to fall to Earth and at the same time normalize the situation on Earth because the moon has now returned to its orbit. With that success, Joe and Brian returned to Earth and met their respective families. Then we are shown Casey, who is still alive. Just like Brian before, Casey also entered into his own mind system. He is welcomed by the kind AI in the form of his own mother, and is invited to live on the moon. And the movie is over. That was the whole storyline of the movie Moonfall. I hope friends are entertained by the storyline this time. And see you in the next storyline. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Bye.